Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to talk about the family, the Holy Family, and their journey to Egypt. Of course, they came from Bethlehem in the Holy Land, coming across Sinai. Again, Sinai is a magnificent place. This is where from Moses left for the first time, and coming back and finding the burning bush and taking the Israelites through Sinai during the Exodus. So it's a very holy place. And when they came here, the Holy Family, they came from the Holy Land through Sinai to the Delta. Here is the Delta. You can see the branches of the River Nile, the two branches of the River Nile. And Cairo is further south. So there is a place here called Mostorod and Ain Shams. Ain Shams. That was actually the first station of the royal family in what we call Greater Cairo now. Of course, they lived for a while in different places in the Delta. But when we talk about Cairo, so Mostorod and Ain Shams was the first station for the Holy Family before they go further south. You can see here what we call Old Cairo and Babylonian fortress. This is where from we got the beautiful icon, the first slide, yeah, the Old Cairo, and that was one of the oldest part of Cairo. By the way, the church, the hanging church that we saw the icon from earlier on, I'll show you some pictures from the inside of the church as well. It's a piece of art. It's about dated back to the 7th century AD. 7th century AD, one of the very early Coptic churches in Egypt. Okay, and then after that they went down to Upper Egypt until they got to a place called Asyut, which is a little bit further north from Luxor. And that was the last station before they went back the same way back to the Holy Land. So during those 4 years, they heard about the birth of Jesus. The birth of Jesus, the divine birth of Jesus. It was very difficult for all the nations, all the people who hear about the birth of Jesus, to accept it. It's difficult to accept this fact. But for the Egyptians, it happens every day. You know, it has happened before, so why not? So they realized that Jesus was someone special. Still a baby. They don't know anything about him, not more than this, but definitely he was special to the Egyptians who met the Holy Family and welcomed them and lived with them and dealt with them and so on. They kept this at the back of their mind. Here, like some icons. We have beautiful icons in Egypt, by the way. Beautiful icons, beautiful collection of icons. The Coptic art is amazing. We have a Coptic museum in Cairo. It's a piece of art. It's quite unique museum. And as I mentioned yesterday, Egypt was one of the very few countries survived the iconoclasm in Europe. So many of the icons and the manuscript survived. Here you can see, ladies and gentlemen, this picture from one of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, which is specifically the tomb of Ramesses IV, one of the most beautiful tombs in the Valley of the Kings. When Christianity introduced to Egypt in the year 61 AD, and they started converting to Christianity much easier and quicker and faster than the rest of the world at that time, for two reasons. Number one, that the story of Jesus and the birth of Jesus was very similar to their own cult of Horus and the divine birth of Horus and so on. So they said that might be a sign, a signal from God to convert to this religion. So if we are suffering a lot in this life, and they were suffering a lot because Egypt was under the Roman occupation, who treated the Egyptians badly, like slaves, or even more than this. And they were torturing them and so on. So they said, if we are converting to Christianity, which is promising us with a better future in the hereafter, it's the religion of love and peace, so at least we are promised a better life in the hereafter. There is no chance to change this life now. So that was the first motive. The second motive, it was very similar to their own belief. What they never expected, ladies and gentlemen, that when the minute they convert to Christianity, as if they were given the Romans another good excuse to persecute them more. Not because they were Egyptians this time, but also because they were early Christians. So thousands and thousands and thousands of Egyptians, especially from Alexandria and the Delta, including some Mark himself, were martyrs and died, lost their lives in the name of this new religion by the Romans. That was for the first 3 centuries or 4 centuries AD. Okay, what has led to? When they couldn't, the early Christians, the poor people in Egypt, when they couldn't stand living in the big cities and the big societies and so on, some of them said, well, enough is enough. They ran away into the desert, the mountains, and they lived there at the beginning individually. They lived in what we call now in Christianity, modern Christianity, cells. Yeah, they lived in cells, like in caves and in the desert, like tents, whatever. And they were attacked by animals, by snakes, and so on. It happened that 2 early Christians, dated back to the 1st and the 2nd century AD. One of them came from Luxor, the other one came from Alexandria, and it happened that both of them went to live by the mountain, in the mountain by the Red Sea mountain ranges. I will show you some pictures of those places, and until today, when I go there, have we done the monasteries? No. When I go there until today, with all the technology, you know, they are well-established communities, they are huge, massive buildings, electricity and water supply, and the buses and the cars and visitors and so on, going there every day and night. Yeah, it's quite a busy place, either visited by the locals, Christians, Copts, or Muslims, as part of the heritage of the place, or by the tourists coming from abroad, and the monks living there, large number of them as well. Until today, with all this, I still see, oh, it's in the middle of nowhere, guys. You know, when you think that someone lived here on his own, with no facilities at all, for years and years, you can imagine the strength of his faith, that he decided to leave everything behind and give up everything, especially that they came from very well-off families. Yeah, and they gave up all this life and they decided to dedicate their life to God. Okay, that created, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of monasteries. Yeah, monasteries were invented by those 2 guys, Saint Anthony and Saint Paul. Yeah, not the famous Saint Paul from Europe, but Saint Anthony and Saint Paul. They were the first to establish the monastic life in Egypt. We're talking about the early 2nd century AD. So that was introduced by Egypt, or by the Egyptians, or by the early Christians, or by the Copts to the rest of the world. So when you visit any monastery anywhere worldwide, you remember the Egyptian monasteries of the Red Sea mountain range. Yeah, I will come to show you some pictures. Anyway, they suffered for like 4 centuries until Christianity became the official religion of the empire, the Byzantine Empire. Great. So they thought, now it's over. Yeah, we can live in peace. Oh, never. Why? Because they haven't agreed on the idea of Jesus when they were discussing the nature of Jesus with the rest of the main church in the old world at the time. The Church of Alexandria insisted on the fact that Jesus was one, with one nature, partly human, partly divine. And he cannot divide them, which was different from the rest of the main churches. And that led to the separation of the Church of Alexandria, or the Egyptian church, from the rest of the world. Egypt still under occupation. So what happened? The early Egyptian Christians will be persecuted by the Roman Christians. So the poor early Christians, or the poor Egyptian Christians, will keep the same suffering again, even after religion became the official religion. Yeah? So many years of persecution by the Romans, either before becoming the official religion or even after. So while during this period, they were hiding in the tombs and the temples. The tombs, like in the Valley of the Kings, for some of you being there, it is hot outside and it is a bit cooler inside because it's like a cave in the mountain. Yeah, so it's nice to live in if you have no shelter in the desert. So it's nice to live in. When they were living inside, they found like crosses or form of crosses, which is the key of life. This is the key of life. Yeah, and that's the cross. I will show you. This is some graffiti by the early Christians on the walls of the tomb. These are legs of the pharaohs and the gods, and you can see the cross here painted. Again, more graffitis. This is in the tomb of Ramesses IV and Ramesses IX in the Valley of the Kings. Okay, here, this is like the Coptic cross. Yeah? Clear. And it was deeply carved on the wall, on the column of the main hall of Philae Temple in Aswan. The story of Philae Temple, which is located on an island in Aswan, it was dedicated to whom? To goddess Isis. So when Christianity was introduced and started converting to Christianity, they found that Isis still well known and famous all over the world. So it used to have like visitors coming from Greece, from Rome, from the rest of the world, from Egypt as well, visiting the temple and worshipping Isis. But now we have a religion which is Christianity. So what should we do? By the 5th century AD, they decided to shut the temple, and by force they converted the temple to a Coptic church. So they carved the Coptic crosses on the columns. Here you can see also the scene from the temples of Karnak. It was a triple statue. In each temple, ladies and gentlemen, we have a trinity. The main god and the two secondary gods. So the trinity of Karnak is the god Amun-Ra. The god Amun-Ra. His wife, goddess Mut, and the son, god Khonsu. Always. In the temple of Isis, where we have the cross here, the head of the trinity was Isis. So it doesn't have to be a god, a male figure. No. Could be also a female figure like Isis. Then her husband will be a secondary god in the temple of Isis. When you go to the temple of Osiris, he will be the head of the trinity and she will be one of the secondary gods. And their son Horus is a common factor. Yeah? So here, the trinity of Luxor. Amun-Ra, the main god, his wife goddess Mut, and the son god Khonsu. The early Christians also chopped it off to make it like a cross. Yeah, it looks like a cross. That's handmade, of course, to make it look very much like the cross. The concept of the Trinity as well is very similar to the Trinity in Christianity. So they were able to accept this religion. This is the site Asyut, as I explained earlier on, was the end of the journey of the Holy Family before they went back up to the Holy Land. Here, St. Anthony Monastery. So this is the area where they have the monasteries by the Red Sea. This is the Red Sea, by the way, yeah, the white one, and that's the monastery. So it's quite far in a way from the Red Sea, and they have like a couple of wells there, but still really tough to live there. I mean, even nowadays. So that's Cairo. It's about like 3 hours drive from Cairo. And to drive from Cairo, you have to go east until you get to the Suez Canal, and then drive south by the Red Sea, and then drive into the desert again. So that's St. Anthony, and St. Paul is not far from it. That's a picture of the monastery from outside with the church, the main church of St. Anthony. That's the entrance. Monasteries are quite nice. Those are the two people, the two saints, St. Anthony and St. Paul. Also, they've lived quite near to each other, but they haven't met. But the last day of the life of St. Paul St. Anthony felt that there is another guy living in the same area, so he went traveling looking for him. And St. Paul used to receive a half loaf of bread brought by a bird every day. So the day when St. Anthony was coming to visit him, and it meant to meet, he received a full loaf of bread. So he knew that he will have a visitor. And they sit together for like hours or so, and then St. Paul died. So St. Paul died, and St. Anthony used his own dress to cover him as a shroud. So that's the entrance to the monastery of St. Paul. It's, as I said, it's huge, massive buildings. That's the picture from inside. So look at the mountain. These are the Red Sea mountains, which is stretching between the Red Sea and the Nile. And this is from the inside of the main church. Here I have like a couple of pictures also to tell you about the similarity in the design when they were building the Coptic church. The church might be in a way different from the church worldwide. What you see here is the inside of the hanging church. Look at the main aisle in the middle, and then you have the right wing and the left wing, but they are different levels. So here you can see that that's the hypostyle hall of Karnak. And you have the windows. Those are the windows here. And you have the windows there as well. It will come in the other slide clearer. I'm talking about the architecture of the church, which is very similar to the architecture of the temples of Karnak and so on. This, ladies and gentlemen, some of the painting fresco on the walls or on the ceiling, to be honest, of the small church of St. Paul. You can see Jesus and the four writers of the Bible. We have two pictures here, and you can see the same scene again, and you can see another scene from the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Those four figures, here we have four figures, and here we have also four figures. Who are those four figures? They were the children of Horus, the sons of Horus. Horus was the son of Osiris, and they were the sons of Horus. Have you heard of what we call the canopic jars? What are the canopic jars? When someone is dead, they do the mummification. They take the internal organs and they place them in alabaster jars. Yeah? The kidneys, livers, and so on. And they leave the heart for the judgment. They leave it in the body. They suck the brain and so on, but we're not into this. And they they make it dry. So the canopic jars, each one of them will have a lid. And the lid is different because the four canopic jars are representing the four sons of Horus. Yeah? That's a plan of the Egyptian temple here. And you can see the plan of the church. At the end or at the rear of the Egyptian temple, what do we have? We have the sanctuary or the Holy of Holies. Yeah? At the end of the church here, we have also the sanctuary, the same thing. I'll go back 2 slides because I would like to show you here those heavy red curtains. You don't have this in the church here. You don't have this in many of the churches, but in the Coptic church, the sanctuary should be hidden behind heavy curtains. The curtains are only opened in a certain occasions. The same thing in the ancient Egyptian temples, it was the same thing. I think I might come to show you another picture later on. But in the Egyptian temples, we had number of priests. Yeah, the priests were categorized. So those who were working here were not allowed to cross to the next section until they are promoted and becoming a higher rank. So they are allowed. So there is a sort of hierarchy. And then they are allowed only when they are promoted to get to the next section and next section and next section and so on. Until you get to the sanctuary or the Holy of Holies, none of those priests was allowed in except the high priest. Only the high priest was allowed in, and the king, of course, both of them. So they have there, what do they have? They have a statue, a little statue of the god or the goddess. Okay, the rest of the people are not allowed to see it, not just to touch it, but also not allowed to see it. Sometimes they need to take it outside. So the king and the high priest, they go first in alone, and then they put the statue in a wooden shrine, and then they open the gates. They invited the other priests in so they can carry it on the shoulders, and they take it to visit another temple or to join a festival or whatever. The same thing happened here with the church, that you have these heavy curtains so you don't see the altar which is behind. So the same concept. Again, how the Egyptian church was influenced by the ancient Egyptian temples and the ancient Egyptian belief. Look at the key of life. That's the key of life. And that's the cross. See the similarity. What is the key of life? The key of life, we call it also the key of the Nile. The key of the Nile. What is the connection? There is no difference between life and Nile. In a country like Egypt, where the main source of water has been always the Nile, so the Nile meant life, and life meant the Nile. Okay? Why the symbol of the Nile, or the symbol of life, has the form of a key? Simply because the ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile god uses that key to open the gates of the river Nile in Central Africa, so the Nile comes in a great inundation. If they were not behaving well that year, so the god will keep the door locked, and then they will have a drought, year of drought and shortage of water, and they will suffer. So that's the symbol of life, the symbol of the Nile. We call it Ankh or the Ankh. So the key of life and the Coptic cross.